she's a mountain, then you're an ocean.
Hi, everybody. This is Lori, and I am the founder and CEO of a company called Inclusivi-TEA. I'm also the author of a new book, You Can Save the World. In fact, you're the only one who can. And this is our podcast, Inclusivi Talks Sustainability. And on our podcast, we like to talk with people about all things sustainable, which includes the environment, economic, and social justice. And we also talk with people about the ways that they're using creativity in their lives. So today we are really fortunate to have with us Darius Ross, who I recently met and who works in the real estate field, but has some really interesting and helpful ideas about how to improve equity in that space. And so, Darius, thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure.
So I want to start by asking you to explain a little bit for us what you're doing right now. So where are you right now in your life? What are you working on?
Right now, I'm in New York City. I'm a real estate developer and entrepreneur, and my specialty now is working with senior citizen developments, multifamily housing, and dealing with low-income citizens. And now it's gotten into investing with women entrepreneurs, or women that want to be entrepreneurs / mommypreneurs that want to create opportunities in their lives, particularly speaking after COVID, because that's created a massive amount of women that have been laid off. So I'm now starting to create a microfund, if you want to call it, to invest in women that want to find out whether or not they have the ability to create their own avenues of ventures.
Very exciting. So, Darius, I'd like to ask how you got here. So tell us a little bit about your history that led you not just to real estate, but now into this new avenue. So tell us some of your history.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I came from Chicago, and I came from a long line of civil rights activists and entrepreneurs and so forth. So basically, it was a situation of my parents came to Chicago when I was about 6 months old. I actually came from a scenario of a great-grandfather that was a bootlegger. So he was an interesting character.
Yeah.
And they actually owned a lot of land in Mississippi. So this same area was southern Mississippi, which was like the area of Laurel and Hattiesburg and so forth, which is actually infamous for what happened with the Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner scenario, because the sheriff of their town was the same sheriff that created that horrific experience, because unfortunately speaking, the African Americans in that community were at the theater that the sheriff owned, and he was funding the theater that actually created a situation that created that catalyst, which started the nuance of what the civil rights movement became. And so that was an interesting thing that he talks about.
Can you talk about that a little bit more and just give us sort of a summary?
What actually happened there was that the African Americans in that community didn't even know that law enforcement was so involved in the backdrop of what was going on there when they were funding the Ku Klux Klan and creating, the infamous Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner killings. So nobody even knew about that it was coming from the Hattiesburg, the Laurel, and the Forest County areas in Mississippi there, as to how that was happening, because law enforcement was very involved. But it was actually being funded, unbeknownst to the African Americans, through this theater. Because they were actually going to the theater that the sheriff and a couple of individuals owned. So it was a very interesting scenario there. So coming from that kind of background, my father decided, he wanted to come to the north and to Chicago and, look for opportunities like a lot of blacks did. Mm-hmm. So when I got to Chicago, it was like getting involved in the Catholic Church. My parents became Catholicism. And at that point in time, growing up a Catholic and then entering the seminary and the whole experience of being in Chicago during the 1970s, 80s as a Catholic, and actually going to a seminary and deciding you wanted to become a priest. But then that took a curve, because it's like, well, all of a sudden you discover that, well, you're not going to go to a seminary because you like girls. And my father had got laid off from his job. And so I ended up in a public school, which is one of the greatest things that happened, because from that program, during the 1979, 80, Jesse Jackson Jr. and a gentleman by the name of Norm Ross at First Chicago Bank created something called Chicago United. And this program allowed inner city kids to actually come into the downtown area to work for places like Con Ed and First Chicago. So this started my career as far as in corporate America, because here are kids that actually would never have gone to downtown to actually be interns, pages, and so forth. So that kind of began my start off.
Fantastic. So you started that, and then what happened next? How did you get specifically into real estate, and how did you become interested in funding particularly women, in their entrepreneurial ventures?
One of the biggest things was I got laid off from the bank. And at that point, it was 1983. So at the scenario, I decided, well, what do you do now? You really don't know what to do. And it's like you're in the midst of the late 80s. And it's like, what do you do? So real estate became a venture because I read, interestingly enough, Donald Trump's book. Strange but true, The Art of the Deal. And I'm thinking, well, now, if he's figuring out how to do leverage, let's play leverage. So from that point forward, I got off into real estate, got my license, and then got a lucky break because I was going to go to Lake Forest College. And at the time, financially speaking, I couldn't because my parents were making too much money. So the professor that was there ended up down in a place called Macomb, Illinois / Galesburg. And from that, I ended up buying 3 properties that were basically owned by Norwest. And they were like giveaway properties. Just assume the mortgage on them, the $100, and assume the mortgage. So that began my career. And from that point forth, it was like everything was going forward. Just learning the art of leverage, learning how to create opportunities. And then I started buying real estate books and just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of real estate books. Before I knew it, I had literally a warehouse of real estate books. So I spent my estate as far as, college, Chicago State, and, spending a couple of years there, realizing one afternoon that the professor that I'm talking to was making less than I could make. I'm looking at, okay, I can make 6% on the deal, or I can make $100,000 on rehabbing a building. Simple economics. I'm listening to economics, but real economics are being taken place because I'm listening to somebody that's telling me about, Mac laws and macro laws and this thing. I'm like, wait a minute now. I can make $100,000 and you're telling me about how to make money? I'm out.
So what do you like about real estate?
The lure of, I like older buildings. I like to be able to create and really transfix buildings. I like the architecture and, more importantly, the history within the building. What the building was made up of, how you can turn around and redesign it. Yep. And then, interesting enough, the creativity of leverage. It's just an interesting thing when you have this scenario where you're able to turn around and say to somebody, listen, you've got a $4 million building. Let's figure out how we can make that work. Let's figure out seller financing. Let's do the layers and so forth. It's just, like you said, the art of the deal. It's so exciting and exhilarating to even be told no. Because I found out 3 things. You can either tell me no, hell no, or no, no. Either way it goes to make this work.
So for you, being a real estate agent sounds like it's an incredibly creative expression for you.
Well, the agent was the part that I didn't like. I didn't sell anything. I went a whole year to sell one thing. So then I realized the investor avenue was the way to go. As an investor, now I have more control. As an agent, all I had was a commission. Right. Once you become the owner, it was, now we're doing something, especially when you don't have credit. You find unique ways to create things when you're young and you don't have credit. And then you find out how you can do so many things because it's like desperation.
Yeah.
You want it, see it, and you're looking at it. And especially when you're looking around going, hey, there's a way to do this. You just got to be creative to figure it out.
I love that. So tell me a little bit about this sort of new venture that you're getting into, which is helping women entrepreneurs, or maybe it's not new, but tell me a little bit about how you came to that and what that entails for you.
I actually stumbled into women entrepreneurship because one of my first ventures on a large scale was through a girlfriend of mine that was very wealthy. And as a result, she funded my business. Mm-hmm. So I began to understand that business is all relationship based.
Yeah.
And in relationship based, if you're able to be smart enough to be able to really express how you want to do this, right? And be able to present to people, okay, this is what I want to get done. This is how I want to get it done. It'll work. So from that point forth, I began, I guess, what we call it now, the give back, being able to each one teach one. So I started getting involved with women that I realized, okay, they have a business idea here. What can we do to make it work? And one of the things I found out was that a lot of women were afraid. And fear is a dangerous thing. It's not the fact that you have the idea. It's the fear of what's going to happen if I fail. Or it's the fear of what family thinks, or it's the fear of, potentially speaking, what might go wrong. And one of the things I always tell any entrepreneur that I get involved with, particularly speaking female, guess what? You're going to fail. Just know it ahead of time.
Yep.
It can be bankruptcy, it can be failure, it can be whatever you want it to be. But the bottom line of it is you're going to fail. Now embrace the fear and go right into it. So I give them my storyline. I said, okay, Picture like this. You're on a battlefield, and the other side is full of soldiers. Now, this is a bad acronym, but something to think about. And I tell you right off the bat, you're going to die. So what are you going to do? You're going to embrace the fact you're going to die, or you're going to sit there and try to figure out how to live? So you embrace the fact you're going to live. So you start thinking about how to make things happen. You already know the odds are stacked against you. So what are you going to do? So that's how I present it. It's like your business plan. Throw that away. People, that's what you need to figure out. Because if the people that you're dealing with on the customer service side of your customers aren't happy, then that's a problem. The next order of business of it is being logically smart about how you do business. If you have a smart way of doing business, then you got to think about, okay, what am I doing in my business? What's wrong with this business? Mm-hmm. The funding is less the problem. It's more the fact of the people, the relationships, because most large businesses now, everything is outsourced. So you don't know what's going on inside your business. So this is what I try to teach.
Really interesting. So what would you say from your childhood led to this, where you are now, which sounds to me very much like successful entrepreneur, but also someone who wants to give back to the community and wants to move the world forward in a positive way. What led to that, do you think?
Hunger.
Okay.
Hunger, because once you go without, that changes everything. And especially when you grew up in the inner city. When you grew up in the inner city and there's so many things that you say aren't here, things that you don't have, things that you want, you start figuring out ways. And as a young person, my first thing was mischievousness. You start getting the mischievous things. And then once you start figuring out, okay, you get your hand slapped a couple of times, you're like, we got to do this a little different. So then you start figuring out, how do I want to do this? So the hunger of things, I was always thirsting for knowledge. And my big thing of it was I created a library at probably 15, 16. And, now this library is probably the size of a small library in a small city. Wow. But that's what it became. I wanted to know a way out. And that's one of the things I will say to any young person. You have options. Now, the question of the hour is, it's the drug dealer, it's the crime, it is some usurpious scenario, but the issue of it is you have options. Now, you have to decide whether you want to be in the gray zone, or you have to decide whether you want to go straight or narrow, whatever the case may be. But you have options. Now, the question of the hour is really, how do you want to play this game? Because it's all a game. And you just got to understand the rules of the game.
Do you feel like the rules of the game are pretty stacked?
Against? I want to make sure you define that well.
Non-white men? Non-male whites?
I'll throw something at you that's interesting. And I had a conversation with a bunch of friends a while back, and we were talking about white superiority, right? And I said, let me expose a question to you. I said, now, there are two free people on this planet, a Anglo male and a black woman. And they were like, why? I said, because in both cases, one is already in charge and the other one has already been subdued down to the lowest level. So what I figured out was, in my alliances with Anglo females, was that, okay, you represent a picture that nobody sees. If I come behind you, nobody sees me either. So I started creating this guerilla technology theory, okay? The deck isn't stacked against me. I just got to figure out how to create another avenue. Okay. And as a result, yes, it's completely stacked. Everything is against me. But guess what? If I already knew that, then I already knew the rules of the game. You can't beat me if I already know that I'm already beaten. See, that's the key. If I'm already beaten, what else can you do to me? I'm already down. What else is there left but to go up? So now I just got to figure out a strategy and a theory to get there. And a lot of times it's a matter of how you utilize or how do you manipulate the circumstances. Because I already know the other guy's sitting there waiting. He's waiting for me to trap myself, which is automatically through the criminal incarceration system. He's waiting for me to have limited education. He's waiting for me to do anything that is going to be strategically in my disablement, if you want to call it. So the number one thing I got to make sure of it is I know where the lines are. Now let me figure out where the road is. And the bottom line of it is that's the issue where I see it. It's like, yes, it is completely stacked. But at the end of the day, if you don't see me coming, then what can you do? You're used to me coming down the road of the gun. You're used to me picketing out front. You're used to all these things other than what you can't see.
Mm-hmm. So you tell me if you agree with this, or it sounds like there's clearly a need for the system to change. But what you're saying is while the system is as it is, there are strategies we can use to understand it and use it.
I'll share something with you that's interesting. And I've been kind of challenged by this move. If I'm the guy on the other side of the table, am I going to give back anything? Hell no. Am I going to turn around and make this thing fair? No, because this has gone on for thousands of years. So why would I change it? But, this is the key but at the end of the day, if I already know you're not going to change it, why am I going to keep asking you? What I now need to do is figure out what I need to do within my own respective confines to force your bluff. If I, as a elective body per se, right? I have this huge body, as we say in Black and Brown America. If I represent $1 trillion, I can change the dynamics of the situation. I stop buying from you. Real simple. Yeah. Okay. So if I'm buying from you, you got a problem. If I'm your biggest consumer. If I'm the biggest consumer of luxury goods, I don't buy, you don't eat. It's very simple. If I don't like what you're doing, then I turn around and change the games. That's the problem. So I'm not going to get you to do anything by begging and pleading you, but I can get you to do something when I hit you in the pocketbook.
Yep.
So that's the real. Can I effectively use economics to force your hand?
I love it, and my belief is that very, very strongly that white Americans have to. Frankly, I think we actually do have to change it, because I think otherwise we're done. I mean, I think that we have another 30 years maybe to create a sustainable world where we all can exist and live together. That's it. And so from my perspective as a white woman, I think it is up to me. But what I love is it's up to me in the same way it's up to you in some ways, because it is the pocketbook. It is me demanding that companies change their behavior. It is me not purchasing from, it is me shopping at BIPOC-owned stores and supporting the community and helping that change occur. And so I think I think what you're doing is, I think that's a perfect way to put it, that let's work with it. But it's my job to make sure that it also changes and we move forward, because we have to. It's not just that it's wrong. It's that we actually have to survive and thrive, because it needs all of us.
It's an issue of economics in the sense that we have our Anglo allies. Yep. And one of the biggest things that I hear people say in a lot of ways, they go, okay, well, white people are evil instead. No, that's not. You have a certain sector of the population, like you have a certain sector of black people that are doing wrong things. Yep. But you have allies that understand, okay, this is wrong. Maybe we profited off it. Maybe we turned around and came out well. Maybe we got ahead. But at the end of the day, we're never going to, this is the thing that's very clear. You're never going to be able to give me back equal playing field. But if you take your foot off my neck, if you take away the playing field and stop unleveling it, every time I get one step ahead, you do something else different. Every time I move forward, you put something else into play, legislation, some type of political issue. That's the key. Just stop changing the game. Let's keep the rules the same. And then I get a chance to come up. But if you keep on switching the rules, we got a problem.
Yeah. We won't go to this next part of the conversation, but I think, the follow-up conversation is, and, how do we do all of that? And how do we maybe get rid of the playing field altogether? I kind of like that, that analogy, different from leveling the playing field. And how do we make a new playing field where it starts out where we all have the same shoes, and we all have the same outfits, and we have the same training, and how do we make that new field? So anyway, thank you for having this conversation with me. I appreciate it so much, and really fantastic conversation. So as you're going forward now, what is for you your hope from what you're working on now? What is your dream?
My dream is I'm looking at now creating on 2 different continents now, the African and Asian continent, a $100 billion corporation that will be based upon infrastructure and the construction of 1 billion units of housing for those communities, because that is an area now that, unlike America, the 18 to 34-year population will probably number about 2 billion people. And whether we know it or not, this is going to be the next population in both Africa and Asia that basically will be the next population of civil unrest, because you're starting to see it in Nigeria now, you're starting to see it in various parts of Asia. And that's going to transcend to America. The only difference of it is America's browning. So America's browning in the sense that you're seeing a huge Hispanic population, the black population is dwindling, but the white population is also dwindling. So we're seeing the change. So now it's a matter of being smart enough to realize that from my vantage point, how to turn around and both capitalize, but then do good corporate service. And how do you maintain the infrastructure? How do you maintain employment? How do you maintain social and economic programs for young people? Because the world over the next probably 40 years is going to be a huge population between 18 and 34. And if we don't turn around and figure out how to keep them employed and functioning, there's going to be a lot of civil unrest, a lot of violence.
So are you already working in African Asia? And I ask in part because that sounds like a gigantic step.
Absolutely. Now I've made contacts in both Nigeria and Bangladesh and India. So I'm beginning to now, COVID stopped everything for me. So that was like the game changer.
Yeah.
So now it's a matter of starting the latter part of 2021, 2022, and begin to transcend that into creating, more opportunities there, more joint ventures, more cooperative opportunities with local developers there. And also I'm now beginning to consider buying construction businesses there because there's a huge population of young people that are unemployed.
Right.
They have educational skills, and I want to turn around and actually set up training facilities there to train these young people in the construction and trades and infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of those countries don't have infrastructure. It's like America. Mr. Biden is trying to push the infrastructure bill, which needs to happen because so many young people here are not going to college, can't go to college, and there's need for them to be in the trades, if for nothing else.
So, and as far as in the U.S., what are your goals in the U.S. now?
I want to be able to create a situation here, whereas I'm now looking at on the Northeast corridor and is also in the Midwest, again, of buying more construction companies and beginning to train both men and women in the trades area, because the construction industry just lost over 500,000 jobs. Yeah. But if we can get this, infrastructure bill pushed forward, it's going to allow for more opportunities for young people to actually get involved in the trades, because you've had so many people retire from that industry.
Right.
And these young people need to be trained and so forth to be able to push forward, because the trades promote better jobs, which promotes more economic opportunity in the communities, again, more housing, and again, the building and so forth of roads, bridges, and so forth. So it's a huge area.
Yeah. So besides hunger, what else drives you? Where do your passions come from? What belief system where does that come from for you?
It comes from just realizing that the inequities of what's going on in the system. When I look at young people, right, and I see where I've been and what I've been through and the experiences. And sometimes I think one of the biggest things of it is looking at young people that have gone through this concept of lack of and the problems of the violence. The violence is driven by lack. It's driven by the hunger. It's driven by the pain. It's driven by all the things that they can't see. They see the nice shiny car. They see a better place to live. They see food. Some of these inner city places that I've been at, they're food deserts. You can't eat there, and you can't eat quality food. So that brings on to something else. There's mental health issues, but the mental health issues are driven because of lack of. The parents didn't have proper medical conditions, and so these kids linger with the same problems. So it's like my passion is driven by trying to say, listen, this needs to change, because if it doesn't, this is going to get far more, as I say, drastic. And just even today, when we look at what's happening now with the number of violent incidents that are happening in the inner city as far as the police are concerned, the big issue there with the police are, okay, growing up, there was a thing that we used to grow up as kids, we would hear the word officer friendly. Well, now, unfortunately speaking, some of those very officers don't understand the dynamics of these communities.
Yeah.
You can't come in there like a stormtrooper and say, listen, this is how it's going to be, because I'm already angry. I'm already confused and so forth. So what drives me is realizing I knew what it was like to have a gun put at your head. I know it's like a cop to tell you, you don't belong in the neighborhood and you live around the corner. It's come on now. But these are the things that we deal with when it comes down to those dysfunctionalities. And so the drive for me is to make it a situation where those things like local policing, where the guy that is policing the neighborhood looks like you, not necessarily looks like you, but he has resemblance of what you feel, mm-hmm. and has empathy for you. And more importantly speaking, he's not there to bust you upside the head. He's there to make sure that the same guy that I fear is the same guy that he fears. We're on the same team.
Yep. Well, and I'm sure that you know all about the police training now, and that it really is, police in general are trained that it's a military model and that the citizens they're serving are actually the enemy. And so if you're trained to believe that the young man in front of you is your enemy, you're going to react very, very differently than if you're trained to believe they're your neighbor. And they might be having a hard time. They may be even doing something wrong, but they're still a human. And they probably are doing that because of something else that happened and you have compassion. That's going to be a very different response than if you're trained that they really are your enemy and that they're out to get you.
Well, see, that's another thing there too. You have men that have come back from soldier experiences.
Yeah.
And you can't come back from a place where you have experienced PTSD or you've experienced death at its highest order. And now you're coming back to some place to basically say, now's the time for me to come in these communities and kick ass and bust heads. That's not how it works, because your mentality's all wrong. So my thing of it, I see what they say, okay, we as the police, we need certain bodies. But now you have to understand that you can't put those same bodies with that military experience into an inner city environment that is like, for example, we call Chicago Chirac, because there have been more people killed in the inner city Chicago than in Iraq. But if you're putting somebody that has been in Iraq there, and they haven't had time to, if you want to call it, de-escalate their minds from where they've been at, that's going to be a problem. Or if you put somebody that's ex-military in there that has not had the time to turn around and deal with their own concerns, because you have these officers in some cases that have mental problems too. So they're just like the person that they're dealing with.
Yeah. So if you were talking to these kids that are coming up that you're talking about, the 18 to, what did you say, 18 to 30?
34.
18 to 34-year-old young people who are coming up that right now jobs are difficult, or the world feels like it's kind of, doesn't necessarily feel positive. What would you say? What's your advice? What's your advice?
I would say first you have to understand that the world is the same way it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's actually no difference. We actually have come full circle, because Marvin Gaye said it best when he said, what's going on in the song? Well, let's take it back. 1970 and 1980 growing up was the same thing. There's nothing different that actually happened, because we had civil unrest from the 60s. We had the 70s. We had the crack epidemic. We had AIDS. We had the same thing if you look at it for what it is. So now, as an 18 to 34-year-old person, the real point of it is that it's a matter of what you're going to do now to resolve the change. And when I say resolve the change, the circumstances are as dire as they can be. But we dealt with the same thing as Generation X. But the problem with it was the matter of, do you want to turn around and become a statistic and play into the hand of the situation? Because this is what the bottom line of it is. This system, if we want to call it that, knows that you're playing into the hand. So what's the first thing you're going to do? Criminal activity. Okay, so you think, well, I have no options, whatever else. This is the best example I use, and I did a program in Chicago about this. I said, now, if, as a young person, if you can write upside down in graffiti, right, you're brilliant. You should be going to art school, art institute as a graphic designer. If you're able to get out there and you can sell crack cocaine, and you can count how many vials you have, and you can count how many baggies you have, you need to be going to become an economist. Because these kids are brilliant. Yep. You take that same kid and you put him on Wall Street, he can trade any stock. So what's the difference? But the point of it is, this kid is geared towards something else different. So as mentors, we have to come into these communities and say, listen, there's another way. You have the right skills. It's just a matter of it's the same thing. You're being the same thing. Same thing with the kid that's able to hustle. Put that kid into a Sears department store, he can sell, say, salt to Santa Claus. This is the same scenario. There's no difference. These kids got the skills. It's just a matter of, unfortunately speaking, the system realizes they have the skills, and the systems realize that, okay, this kid says to himself, I can make $10,000 a day. So why would I want to turn around and go into a legitimate job? But the point of it is, the system doesn't tell them that, okay, they're bouncing in and out of jail. They get used to that. Yeah. So that's the real problem, being able to take those same, I call them transitional skills, take those same transitional skills that they learn in the street and transition that to corporate America.
Do you think that that's a significant shift in education generally? Because I think that you hit the nail right on the head. We're not talking about people who don't have intelligence. We're not talking about, well, they're just bad. That's not remotely accurate. What we're talking about is, here's how I've learned to survive, and incredible intelligence and ingenuity, and just the ability to go forward in dire circumstances. So the question is, how do we change the system so that we're recognizing that this is a skill? You do have these skills. Let's get you trained and into the right field where you can make a living doing that on Wall Street or in a bank or in Sears, wherever it is. How do we do that, do you think?
We create guerrilla programs. I mean, on my one sheet that I sent you, I talked about the guerrilla strategies. We have to guerrillatize the educational system.
I like that term, but tell me about that.
It's a unique way of looking at it. Okay, as a kid, I spent my time in the closet because I don't know if you remember the cartoon Gorilla. I thought that the gorillas that I was seeing in Vietnam on Walter Cronkite when he was on TV, that this was actually real gorillas. And I'm like, wow, these gorillas are bad guys. This is awesome. So I was in the closet and played this game of the soldiers and being the military soldiers. So the point of it is, it's the same thing. When we look at Vietnam as how it was, anytime these soldiers were walking on top of the Viet Cong, you had no idea they were tunneling under you. Yeah. It's the same thing with these kids. We have to tunnel under them and get an idea of how to help them embrace education. So this is the guerrilla model. Okay, if this kid has a skill to understand baggies, okay, put him in a laboratory environment. Help him work with a Merck or a Abbott Labs. Teach him that skill, okay? How he can be a pharmacy technician and so forth. Still make money, okay? If this kid is the skill of detailing a car, teach him the skill. The point of it is we have to meet them where they are versus where we want them to be at. Create a program or programs that allow them to understand what their skill sets are. Because some of these kids' IQs are probably over 150, but nobody knows that until they get in the incarceration system. A good example of that is we'll look at track and field. When you think about the fact that this is a strange example, but when you got to shoot the kid in the back because you can't catch him, the kid is running basically a marathon running down the street, and you can't catch him. You're supposed to be a police officer in the best of shape, and this kid is running a 440 in less than 3. What does that say? He's track and field. So again, the point of it is meet them where they are. Understand their skill set. Take mentors or take former individuals that understand their skill set, and let's retrain them skills. Retool what they know. Tweak where they're at. That's the problem. The educational system just needs to be tweaked because you have to now bring in individuals that have a different skill set in education. Not an education in the sense of a 4-year degree, but an education in the sense of the street sense as to where they are so they can relate to them to get them back to where you can get them educated. Yeah. So it's like intervention, if you want to call it that.
That makes a lot of sense. So guerrilla teaching, guerrilla education. Okay. So Darius, we've now been talking for about half an hour. And as we talked about before we started the podcast, we generally try to keep these to about half an hour. So what we're going to do for everybody who's listening and watching, we are going to end this episode with Darius, and we're going to start another one. So there'll be a part 2 of our interview with Darius. And you're going to want to listen to that one too, because we're going to have Darius tell us a story from his life. We're also going to talk a bit more about where he's at and what he's doing. And we'll talk about some of the other aspects of his life and maybe a little bit more about how he feels that in sort of encouraging women, female entrepreneurs is a helpful and good thing for us as a society. Yes, thank you so much for being here. This was Inclusivi-TEA Sustainability.
If she's a mountain